They called it a retirement celebration. But as I stood there under flickering fluorescent lights, watching a sheet cake melt into a puddle of purple frosting, I realized exactly what this was. This wasn't a party. This was a funeral. And I was the corpse. My name is Evelyn Shaw, 4 years old, head of compliance at Helix Corp for nearly 2 decades. Or, I was. Today, I was being retired. Voluntarily. Which is corporate for, get out before we push you. End of section. There was a balloon bouquet tied to a folding table gray, teal, and HR beige. The slideshow said, "Thank you for your service, Eva." Eva. Not Evelyn. Not even the right damn name. Sierra Langford, the 3-year-old CTO with influencer hair and the ethics of a Vegas magician, stood at the front of the room like a game show host. She smiled wide and spoke louder than necessary. "We're so grateful for Evelyn's legacy, as we make room for a more agile, digitally native future." Oh, digitally native. That's what they called the 2-4-year-olds who needed help opening a PDF. I stood there smiling, nodding, pretending this wasn't a burial. But inside, I was screaming. 19 years of scrubbing audit trails, flagging ghost vendors, fixing sloppy fraud before it went nuclear, and they were erasing me with frosting and misspelled slides. And you know what hurt most? I almost let them box me up, walk me out, and turn me into a footnote. Just another outdated compliance lady with a tote bag full of retirement brochures. But not this time. Because while they clapped and clinked their plastic champagne, I was already 2 steps ahead. The system they thought I'd forgotten? I built it. I remembered every line of code they tried to bury. Have you ever been pushed aside just because you were past your prime? If this hits close to home, drop your story in the comments. You're not alone. Back in the conference room, Sierra handed me a framed certificate. Her nails were perfect. Her eyes were empty. "Thank you for your contributions, Evelyn," she said with a tilt of the head. "You were foundational." Foundational. Like asbestos? Like lead paint? I smiled and took the frame. But inside, I had already flipped the switch. This wasn't the end. It was the opening scene. And they had no idea what was coming next. 2 days after the cake incident, my calendar pinged with something called a legacy sync. No location. No agenda. Just a block of time and a smiling emoji from Sierra's assistant. I knew better than to expect a proper meeting. At Helix Corp, if something was important, it never made it onto the calendar. And if it had a smiley face, that meant someone was about to get steamrolled. The room was smaller than I expected. No windows. One of those faux collaborative spaces with modular chairs and that weird smell of lemon sanitizer and resignation. Sierra stood at the center like a TED Talk in waiting. She wore an eggshell blazer and her signature expression of benevolent conquest. Beside her, on a screen too large for the space, was the new organizational chart. It looked like a family tree that had disowned me. "We're restructuring for agility," she began. "Legacy roles like yours have been instrumental, but we're pivoting toward a decentralized innovation model." I nodded slowly, as if she were speaking in actual language. "What exactly does that mean for my team?" I asked, knowing full well the answer. "It means," she said, pausing for effect, "that we're inviting our tenured staff to consider new journeys. Opportunities outside the structure. Outside the structure. Not fired, not laid off. Just unstructured. Like junk code." My direct reports, 3 of the best auditors I'd ever worked with, were suddenly reassigned. Some into vague, strategic pods. Others were temporarily unallocated. It was a corporate magic trick. 1 second you existed. The next, poof, redundant. I wasn't surprised. Sierra had been testing the waters for months. First with late-night Slack threads about future-ready frameworks. Then with quiet changes to who had access to compliance logs. I'd watched it unfold like a slow-moving coup in sensible heels. They didn't want experience. They wanted control. And I was in the way. What stung the most wasn't the demotion, it was the gaslighting. They kept using words like honor, respect, and evolution like sprinkles over a bitter pill. Of course, Sierra added, we'll be celebrating your legacy with a feature in next month's internal newsletter. A newsletter? For 19 years of keeping this place from legal oblivion. Apparently, I was worth a paragraph between Wellness Wednesdays and an announcement about the new kombucha tap. Back in my officery, my transition pod, I stared at the empty wall where my audit certifications used to hang. They'd been quietly boxed up for redecoration. All I could think was, is this it? After all the late nights, the cover-ups I stopped, the payroll errors I corrected before lawsuits landed, this is how it ends? And worse, am I crazy for being angry about it? That's the insidious part. They don't just push you out, they make you feel guilty for noticing. I sat there in silence, hands folded over the same desk I'd used since 2007, listening to the muffled laughter of interns in the hallway. They didn't know my name, and that was the point. But I did something that afternoon I hadn't done in months. I logged into the archive interface. Not out of spite. Not yet. But because something was beginning to hum beneath the surface. A low, persistent vibration of warning. They were changing the architecture. And I needed to know how deep the rot went. I wasn't gone. Not yet. And Sierra had no idea what I still had access to. Not the system. The history. And history, I've learned, never deletes cleanly. I've always believed that systems remember, even when people don't. Files get renamed. Folders get moved. But if you know where to look, really look, nothing ever disappears. That week, after the realignment, I didn't storm out. I didn't make noise. I did what they expected of a 5-4-year-old compliance relic. I kept my head down. I nodded politely. I packed my drawer in slow, ceremonial silence. But what they didn't know, what they'd never understand, is that I'd been quietly building my own backup system for years. Not out of paranoia. Out of habit. Because that's what you do when you're the one they call to clean up the mess after the headlines, after the audits, after the public apologies someone else gets paid to deliver. So, while Sierra hosted vision town halls with pastel infographics and buzzwords like velocity and post-silo synergy, I was dragging files off legacy drives like I was prepping for a flood. Every internal eyes-only memo. Every vendor invoice that didn't quite add up. Every Slack thread that started friendly but ended with, let's take this offline. I didn't know yet what I'd do with them. But I knew enough not to walk out empty-handed. One night, I stayed late under the pretense of finishing my exit checklist. The office was quiet. The kind of quiet that makes the hum of the HVAC system sound like a threat. I opened the folder marked Archive 15-523. The access logs hadn't been touched in weeks. No one was checking. No one wanted to check. Click by click, I found things that made my stomach knot: documents flagged as finalized but still editable. Contract PDFs with metadata from different authors. Vendor reviews that were copied from the same template. Only the company names changed. It was sloppy. Too sloppy for coincidence. I looked at the stack of sticky notes I'd pulled from my old cubicle drawer. Half of them were jokes I'd left for myself. Don't trust Jerry in finance. Microwaves, tuna. Vet. Check if invoice ID ends in 777 again pattern. I stared at that one for a long time. That invoice pattern had shown up across 7 departments over 3 years. I'd flagged it before. The resolution? Noted. Closed. They didn't fix the hole. They just painted over it. I exhaled, slow. Not out of anger. But clarity. This wasn't about me being too old or not digitally agile. This was about erasing the only person left who remembered how the system was built. They didn't want compliance. They wanted compliance-looking silence. Have you ever seen something wrong, something broken, and been told to stay quiet? You're not alone. If that moment still lives in your memory, leave a comment, it matters. That night, I took out a small metal lunchbox from under my desk. It looked like a joke, something my dad used back at the Ford plant in Detroit. But inside was a 128 GB thumb drive, unlabeled, unassuming. I didn't name it, didn't write a manifesto, just started copying. One folder at a time. No rush. No panic. Just precision. Because when a system collapses, they'll always blame the oldest part. The outdated firewall. The unsupported plugin. The legacy staffer who couldn't keep up. But not this time. This time, the legacy remembered. And it had receipts. It started with a whisper. Not literal, but the kind of digital whisper that makes the hair on your arms stand up. A missing log. A blank timestamp. A file that should have been there. I was reviewing some folders from Q2 when I noticed it. The vendor audit trail from last year, the one I had triple flagged in red, was gone. Not deleted. Not moved. Just gone. But that wasn't what made my stomach turn. No, what chilled me was how clean it looked. Like someone had gone through with bleach and glove-scrubbing fingerprints off glass. A few hours later, Jordan from Cybersecurity 24, nervous energy, always smelled faintly like canned espresso, popped his head over the cubicle partition. Hey, Evelyn. You ever notice anything weird with the shared compliance folders? I paused. Weird how? He scratched at the edge of his eyebrow, scanning the hallway like he was about to commit a felony. Some logs are just missing. Like vendor backups, cross-check reports. It's like they never existed. I didn't blink. He nodded once, tapped twice on the edge of my desk, a quiet Morse code of I saw nothing, and disappeared down the corridor. Smart kid. I minimized my screen and pulled up the company's internal archive interface. The one no one used anymore, since everything got migrated to cloud-based dashboards with pastel buttons and motivational pop-ups. But I remembered the bones of the old system. The real architecture. And when I dug in, I saw it. Not deletion. Replacement. Files with familiar names, familiar sizes. But the metadata, all recent. Modified by users with no traceable ID. Audit trails wiped. Vendor info edited. And the scary part? The new versions were perfect. Too perfect. The kind of perfect that only happens when someone is trying way too hard to look innocent. I leaned back in my chair, hands gripping the armrests. I'd seen this before. Years ago, when a CFO tried to mask an embezzlement trail by creating a corrected invoice set. It worked for a while. Until I flagged the font inconsistencies. He's now selling supplements on Instagram. But this was cleaner. More calculated. Someone was deliberately rewriting history and doing it well. And the only reason I caught it is because I remembered the mess. The irony wasn't lost on me. They'd called me outdated. Said my methods were too manual, too cautious. But none of the bright-eyed digital natives noticed the rot under the floorboards. Because here's the thing about systems. When you build them, you know where the ghosts live. That afternoon, I didn't speak to anyone. I just packed up early and said I wasn't feeling well. I went home, changed into a cardigan that still smelled like copier toner, and booted up the old tower PC under my sideboard, the one with the Windows XP sticker and the humming fan like a tired lawnmower. It was slow. Loyal. Mine. I connected through my VPN and pulled up the untouched archive, the real one. The backup I'd started the week Sierra gave me that cake. And as I watched the files begin to sync, I didn't feel afraid. Not yet. But I did feel something colder. Not panic. Not adrenaline. Conviction. Because whoever was doing this wasn't just covering their tracks. They were burning the map. And now, I was the last person left who knew what the road used to look like. The lunchbox didn't look like much. A dented rectangle of brushed steel, scuffed at the corners, latch slightly crooked from years of being slammed shut in a hurry. It had belonged to my father, union guy, shift foreman at the Ford plant in Dearborn. He carried his bologna sandwich and thermos of black coffee in it for 7 years without fail. I started bringing it to work in 2020 as a joke. You know, old school meets new normal. On People thought it was kitschy, ironic, something quirky to post about on Slack. But I never told anyone I'd kept it under my desk ever since. Or that I'd lined the inside with foam and added a false bottom. Old habits die hard when you come from a family that treated trust like borrowed tools, useful, but not guaranteed to come back. And now, as I stared at that lunchbox resting on my dining room table, I knew exactly what it was going to carry next. Not a sandwich. Not nostalgia. But insurance. The thumb drive sat beside it, blank white plastic, the kind you could buy in a 5-pack at any office supplies store. Nothing special. No label. No encryption yet. Just potential. Like a quiet threat waiting to take form. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. Felt the weight of it, not physical, but something heavier. Every file I'd gathered. Every audit trail. Every invoice with a mismatched timestamp or shell company routing code. The evidence was all there. Not arranged like a case. Not yet. But layered. Documented. Traceable. I wasn't planning revenge. Not really. I didn't want explosions or headlines. I didn't want to see Sierra cry or watch executives scramble for lawyers. What I wanted was proof. Proof that I wasn't just bitter. That I hadn't imagined the corruption. That someone else had made the system sick and I wasn't crazy for noticing. Because that's the thing no one warns you about in the corporate world. It's not just the betrayal that gets you. It's the slow erosion of certainty. They don't fire you for speaking up. They just make you feel like you were wrong to see anything at all. So I slid the thumb drive into the foam lining, wrapped it in a cloth napkin, tucked it beneath a bag of trail mix and an expired packet of Splenda. Snapped the latch shut. Click. Final. Quiet. Almost ceremonial. Then I carried it out to the garage. Set it down on the top shelf, between a box of old Christmas lights and a bin labeled Tax Returns 2009-2013. Somewhere no one would look. But where I'd always know it was waiting. Because let's be honest, I wasn't entirely sure what came next. Maybe I'd keep collecting. Maybe I'd do nothing. But just in case someone tried to erase what I knew. Just in case they got bold enough to bury the truth completely. That lunchbox would be there. Not as a weapon. Not yet. But as a whisper in the dark. Try me. The first time I noticed Curtis, he was mopping the hallway outside the executive suite, slow, deliberate strokes like he was painting something invisible. He didn't speak. Didn't smile. But he looked at me. Just for a second too long. Tall, wiry, with gray at the temples and that kind of posture you only get from being in the military or never missing a shift in your life. I'd seen him around before. Always nights. Always quiet. Most people didn't notice him. But once you did, you wondered how you'd missed him all this time. A few days later, I was leaving late again pretending to wrap up compliance exit tasks when I passed him in the stairwell. He didn't stop mopping, didn't look up. But just as I passed, he murmured, "You don't want to take the freight elevator this week, Miss Shaw." That was it. No explanation. Just a warning, slid between syllables like a secret note passed in class. I paused. Glanced back. He was already gone. From that point on, Curtis was everywhere I needed him to be, but only when no one else was looking. Outside copy rooms. At junctions with blind security spots. Lingering just long enough to be seen if you knew what to see. Once, as I was about to print a redacted invoice set from my desk, he appeared behind me like a ghost with keys. "If you're gonna print anything important," he said low, "don't do it from here. They're flagging keystrokes now." He didn't ask what I was doing. Didn't want to know. Just helped. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel entirely alone. It's strange how the most unlikely people become your anchors. I used to think allies were loud. The ones who stood up in meetings or posted LinkedIn essays about integrity. But Curtis? He fought quietly. With glances. With silence. With well-timed warnings. So I moved differently. I stopped logging into the company archive from the office. I routed everything through my home server, Dusty, loyal Frankenstein of a desktop wrapped in layers of encryption so old, even the interns wouldn't recognize the interface. I dug deeper into Sierra's procurement records. Invoices that once seemed bloated now screamed fraud. 5 shell companies, all labeled Digital Risk Assessment Partners, each with a separate LLC. 3 shared the same WeWork address in Miami. 2 were linked to a holding firm in Belize. And the signatories? Not Sierra. Of course not. But her grad school roommate. Her brother-in-law. A web so sloppy, it was almost arrogant. One invoice charged $38000 for a threat landscape overview. The report? 6 pages of ChatGPT boilerplate and a JPEG of a padlock. They weren't even trying to hide it anymore, because they thought no one would look. But I was looking. And I wasn't blinking. I compiled it all. Blurred names where I had to. Redacted personal identifiers. But left just enough thread for someone to follow. I didn't send it to HR. Didn't call a journalist. Instead, I sent it to Ela Mearson, my attorney. Semi-retired. Orthopedic heels. Once sued a university into the ground for age discrimination. Subject line. For contingency. Body text. If I vanish, send this. Attached PDF. Grocery. List. Final. PDF. Encrypted. Buried. Waiting. Ever seen something you weren't supposed to and realized you might be the only one willing to act? Drop a candle in the comments if you've ever stood in that shadow. You're not alone. That night, I passed Curtis by the loading dock. He handed me a can of root beer. Said nothing. Just pointed toward the breaker box near the freight panel. Emergency lights failed twice last week, he said quietly. That's not an accident. I nodded. Didn't speak. But I held that root beer all the way home like it was a talisman. A reminder that someone else still saw what was happening. Because when you're fighting shadows, you need someone who knows how to move inside them. War doesn't always begin with a bang. Sometimes, it begins with a folder named Vacation, photo book, 2018 zip, and a silence so thick it hums in your ears. By the time I got home that night, the root beer from Curtis was still cold in my hand. I set it on the kitchen counter beside a worn notepad filled with scribbles file names, access dates, tax IDs that didn't match vendor names. It looked like nonsense to anyone else. To me, it was a battle map. I booted up the tower PC. The same old beast with a cracked USB port and a fan that rattled like bones in a drawer. It was slow. It was loud. But it was mine. And more importantly, it wasn't on their network. I plugged in the second USB brand new, still smelling faintly like packaging glue, and wiped it twice, just to be sure. Then I started layering the data. Not all at once. Not in a rush. This was not the time for recklessness. This was the time for structure. I created a file hierarchy that looked boring on the surface. Conference photos. Budget templates. Family tree PDFs. Inside, each, compressed and encrypted, were subfolders of raw material. Invoices with ghost signatures. Slack exports with redacted slurs. Time-stamped audits where the numbers shifted just a little too perfectly. Every folder was wrapped in AES 256, bit encryption. The same protocol we used during the 2017 IT breach. They'd called me paranoid then. Now? It felt like foresight. I wrote a readme.txt for one folder. Plain, uncapitalized. It said, if you're reading this, you freed around. Now, find out. Asterisk. I didn't sign it. Didn't need to. After 2 hours, the drive was full. I held it in my palm. It felt heavier than its plastic shell should allow. Not because of its physical weight, but the truth it carried. I opened the metal lunchbox, nestled it beside the older drive, tucked both into the foam lining and closed the lid. Click. 2 drives. 2 copies. 1 truth. The first backup would stay offline, deep in the archive server beneath my dining room. The second would move with me, because I knew it was coming. The silence. The access revokes. The sudden reconfiguration that would lock me out with a smile. And I had no plans to go down confused. I wasn't a hero. Wasn't trying to burn the place down. But if they wanted to make me disappear digitally, professionally, historically, then I needed the power to remind them that some ghosts bite back. So I wrote a short email to Ela Mearson, my attorney. No pleasantries, just the essentials. Subject contingency. Body, if I go Keytranet. Attachment. Grocery, list, final, PDF. Then I encrypted the original, deleted the sent file, and wiped my desktop twice. I leaned back in my chair. The screen went dark. The reflection staring back wasn't scared. She looked ready. It happened on a Wednesday. Gray sky. Half cold coffee. The kind of day where the world feels slightly off axis. I was sitting in my living room, wrapped in a cardigan older than most of Sierra's team, trying to act normal. Trying to believe that maybe, just maybe, nothing would happen. That maybe the drives would stay hidden. That the files would stay untouched. That the truth I'd packed away in encryption would remain quietly waiting, like a loaded gun nobody knew was there. I had just microwaved leftover lasagna when my phone buzzed. Once. Twice. Then a third time. Not texts. Not email. System alerts. Custom vibration. Reserved only for one thing. Triggered protocol flags. I dropped the fork without realizing. Unlocked my screen. The first notification hit like ice water. Unauthorized login attempt. Archive folder. Vacation. Photo book. 2018 to zip. Location. External IP address. Unknown device. Status. Decryption attempt blocked. I stared at the screen. Then exhaled. Not panic. Not fear. But activation. Because this wasn't a drill. Someone had tried to open the decoy. Someone thought they were being clever. And, in doing so, they triggered everything. I moved to the desk without a word. Bent down. Powered on the tower PC. The familiar chime buzzed to life like an old war drum. My secondary monitor blinked. Then it began. Insurance deployment. In progress. Targeted recipients. 27. Status. Sending. Each packet went to a different address. Preloaded. Pre-authorized. SEC. Midwest Division. Rotors Ethics Einbox. Whistleblower Gateway. Contractors Legal Alliance. My attorney. Even Curtis, via burner proton mail I'd slipped into the script last week. Not everything. Not the full dump. Just enough. Enough to be seen. Enough to set the machine in motion. The drive didn't burn. It didn't scream. It simply worked. White. Precise. Irrevocable. I watched name after name flash across the screen targets selected for maximum friction. Not to destroy, but to disrupt. To force questions. To force light into dark corners. And as the last file blinked out into the world, I sat down. Heart steady. Hands still. The quiet after was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. Then my phone buzzed again. Buzz. Was this you? Buzz. Holy sh*t, you seeing this? Buzz. Please call me. Please. Buzz. Ella. We may have movement. Sit tight. I didn't reply. Not yet. I poured myself a glass of water, turned on a rerun of Frasier, and let the room fill with white noise and inevitability. Because it was done. They opened the wrong folder. And the system had responded the only way it knew how. Automatically. Silently. And with perfect precision. If you've ever been forced into silence, but still found a way to drop a flash in the comments, let someone know they're not alone. Later that night, I opened the metal lunchbox again. Just to see it. To feel the weight of what still rested inside. I didn't touch the drives. Didn't move a thing. But I whispered under my breath. Let's see what they do now. And I meant it. By Thursday morning, the silence was gone. It started with a headline small, almost polite tucked into the corner of a business blog. Unverified documents surface alleging procurement irregularities at Helix Core. I didn't click on it. Didn't have to. I'd written half of what they were about to print. Then came the alerts. One by one. Emails. Pings. Newsroom inquiries. And the best one of all? A press release from Helix Core's comms team, wrapped in panic and PR gloss. We are aware of unsubstantiated materials circulating online and are conducting a full internal review. That's how they phrased it. Unsubstantiated. Like the truth was a rumor. Like numbers on a spreadsheet could lie if you blurred your eyes enough. But it didn't stop there. By 1:00 p.m., 3 senior executives had locked their LinkedIn profiles. By 2:30, Sierra's carefully curated Twitter timeline went dark. New quotes. New affirmations. Just a message. This account is protected. Protected from what? I wondered. From truth? From accountability? From people who finally saw behind the curtain? I walked to the corner store. Bought cat food I didn't need, and a copy of the Wall Street Journal. The cashier didn't look twice at me. But I looked down at the front page and saw the first ripple turn into a crack. SEC reviewing documents related to Helix Core's vendor network ahead of IPO filing. There it was. 4 lines in a national paper. Everything I'd flagged, redacted, encrypted, wrapped in metadata and plausible deniability was now public. And the machine was choking on it. Online, they were calling it the Shaw Protocol. I never named it. Didn't want the spotlight. But the internet loves a symbol, and somehow a whistleblower with a lunchbox became one. Reddit threads spun up faster than I could read. Former employees came out of the woodwork. I was told I wasn't scalable. They reassigned me after I flagged a duplicate invoice. Sierra called our whole team Deadwood. I have the Slack receipts. It spread like dry grass catching flame. And then, the email came. Not from the company. Not from HR. From someone anonymous. A burner account. No greeting. No sing-off. Just this. She thought no one kept records. You proved her wrong. Thank you. I sat there, holding my phone, the screen glowing in the late afternoon light. Hands calm. But something in my chest, a tightness I hadn't noticed in months, slowly started to unwind. Not relief. Not celebration. Recognition. For the first time, someone saw what I'd been carrying. What I'd refused to let them erase. Not because I wanted revenge, but because I couldn't stand to be written out of the story I helped build. The implosion wasn't loud. No breaking glass. No arrests. Not yet. But it was happening. Emails being recalled. Meetings canceled. People whispering in corners and texting each other in fragments. We scrubbed those files. She had backups? Do not put anything else in writing. Call only. And somewhere behind every word was the same haunting realization. They thought they buried me. But I was the archive. By Friday morning, the building was burning. Not literally. No sirens. No smoke. Just a slow, internal combustion of reputation and control. I woke to an inbox that looked like it was trying to outrun itself. More than 200 unread messages. Subject lines like, Media inquiry, urgent comment requested. SEC follow-up, timeline confirmation needed. Duval, clarification on vendor 0317A, was this approved? I didn't open a single one. I let them pile up like digital ash. Instead, I made oatmeal. Fed the neighbor's cat while she was at dialysis. Then sat in my recliner and turned the morning news on mute. That's where I saw it. Ticker scrolling across the bottom of the screen like a verdict. Breaking. Whistleblower leak exposes fraud at Helix Core. SEC investigating IPO. Integrity. My spoon hovered midair. They said whistleblower. Not disgruntled. Not ex-employee. Whistleblower. The term landed like a gavel in my chest. It wasn't just a reaction. It was a redefinition. I scrolled through forums out of curiosity more than anything else. Reddit was ablaze. Conspiracy sleuths, bitter ex-employees, anonymous HR reps dropping breadcrumbs. Some called it Operation Fossil Fuel. Others preferred Lunchbox Gate. One post claimed the documents came from an AI whistleblower that had gained sentience and snapped. I laughed at that one. Only slightly. And then came the real message. Carla used to be in payroll. Left last year after they restructured her bonus out of existence. We hadn't spoken since her going away cupcakes. But her name lit up my phone like a flare. Evelyn. Holy hell. Please call me. Against my better judgment, I did. She picked up mid-sentence. They fired Alan and Priya. Gone. No goodbyes. No notices. Their profiles were wiped clean like they never worked here. I said nothing. And the IPO's off. Delayed indefinitely. Rumor is Sierra's getting subpoenaed. They're panicking. And it was you, wasn't it? Still, I didn't answer. She lowered her voice. Even if you never say it, I just want to say thank you. Then she hung up. I stared at the screen in my hand. Not triumphant. Not smug. Just still. The truth was, I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't feel like a symbol. I felt like a woman who'd carried weight for too long and finally put it down. But the fallout had only begun. By that afternoon, CNBC ran a segment titled, Investor Exodus. Helix Core's largest backers pull out following ethics leak. The clip showed a man in a stiff blue tie muttering about fiduciary responsibility and compliance failures. His words were dry. But his money? Loud. And when he bailed, others followed. At 4:02 p.m., a leaked congressional memo began circulating online. Preliminary inquiry opened into Helix Core's financial irregularities and potential age discrimination practices. That line stopped me cold. Not because it was unexpected, but because I hadn't even planned that part. That was just the rot seeping out on its own. I sat there on my living room floor, papers scattered, the lunchbox next to me unlocked, empty. The drives were secure elsewhere now. But the box still sat like a relic from another war. A reminder that I was never the virus. I was just the patch they ignored. I didn't attend the press briefings. Didn't retweet the headlines. Didn't give a quote or hire a publicist. I didn't need to. The avalanche had already begun, and I'd learned a long time, agoin. Something that big starts to fall. You don't stand in its way. You step aside, you watch. And if you're lucky, you get out clean. By Saturday, the calls had mostly stopped. Not because the questions were answered, but because the questions had multiplied. People were digging now. People with credentials. People who wore wire-rimmed glasses and carried legal pads and spoke in acronyms. The story was no longer about me. It had expanded organically, wildly into something no one could control. I watched it from my porch. Not metaphorically. Literally. I'd driven 3 hours upstate to a small cabin by a lake I hadn't visited in nearly 10 years. The kind of place where cell reception was a suggestion and the loudest sound at night was frogs. It had belonged to my father. He built it in the 7-0 Swen walls were wood-paneled and a radio was high-tech. I unlocked the door with a key that still had a faded tag reading. Shaw, front. The cabin smelled like dust and pine and silence. I opened every window. Let the breeze roll through. And for the first time in what felt like years, I let my shoulders drop all the way down. Not out of exhaustion, but relief. I wasn't staying hidden. I wasn't running. I was releasing. Releasing the fight. The tension. The weight of knowing too much and being told to sit still with it. I brewed real coffee, with real cream and sat on the porch as the sun dragged its heels across the water. Next to me, on a wicker table, sat the metal lunchbox. I opened it. No drives. No napkins. No backup plans. Just a paper envelope. Inside. Wildflower seeds. I'd picked them up from a roadside co-op just outside town. I didn't know why at the time. But now it made sense. Because when something has burned long enough, when the ground has cleared, when the old roots have been torn out, that's when you plant new things. Not because the fight didn't matter, but because it ended. And I had no desire to be a martyr. I didn't want my face on some whistleblower blog. Didn't need applause or hashtags. What I wanted was air. And quiet. And the freedom to choose silence because it was mine, not because it was forced on me. I sipped my coffee and watched a crane circle over the lake. Everything felt slower, softer, almost absurdly ordinary. But that was the point. Peace doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with stillness. The kind you earn. The kind they never expected someone like me to find. I wasn't a symbol. Wasn't forgiven. And I sure as hell wasn't sorry. But I was, finally, free. Monday came quietly. Birdsong. Light through gauzy curtains. The smell of old wood and fresh coffee. No alarms. No calendar invites. No mandatory webinars on postmodern leadership paradigms. Just stillness. And then my phone vibrated. Not a flood this time. Just one email. Subject line. Final departure review. Confirmation required. No greeting. No sign-off. Just corporate coldness, wrapped in plausible deniability. Hi, Evelyn. Just doing a last sweep of records and inventory. Wanted to confirm you didn't leave behind any personal items or hardware. You know. Just in case. Asterisk. Jared. Security operations. I stared at the screen. Not surprised. Not rattled. Just amused. They weren't asking. They were warning. We know you took something. We just can't prove it. I hit reply. Typed exactly one character. Smile. Then hit send. Deleted the thread. Closed the phone. Later that day, I walked into town. No one recognized me. Just another quiet woman buying freezer peas and instant coffee. But behind the sunglasses, I was electric. Because while they scrambled for control, I had already let go. That was the difference. I wasn't trying to win anymore. I wasn't in it for the headlines. But they were. And it was tearing them apart. By noon, every major outlet had picked it up. Whistleblower leak uncovers systemic age discrimination at Helix Core. Former CTO subpoenaed in vendor fraud scandal. Class action brewing, as SEC investigates IPO integrity. Turns out, it wasn't just the fake audits or shell vendors. It was patterns. Promotion data. Res déferrals. Performance reviews rebranded as reskilling initiatives. Over 40 employees aged 50 plus labeled as unscalable in internal HR documentation going back 6 years. And now? Now they were organizing. One even messaged me through a burner account. We're forming a class. If you ever want to join, the door's open. You did this. You gave us air. I didn't reply. I wasn't looking for a banner or a battle cry. That fight belonged to them now. Mine was over. The next morning, I drove back to the cabin. Windows down. Hair unbrushed. No music. Just wind. I unpacked groceries, opened the back door, and sat down with a pen and the envelope of wildflower seeds I'd left on the table. The lunchbox was still there. Empty. But still sacred. I didn't need it anymore. Because sometimes, the system doesn't just punish you for remembering. It panics when it realizes it forgot what you built in the first place. And when that system bites back, it's not vengeance. It's consequence. You don't have to scream to be heard. You don't need a title to be remembered. And just because they try to write you out doesn't mean the story ends. Sometimes, the legacy isn't the system you left behind. It's the crack you made in the one that tried to erase you.